That's impossible. Richard staggered back, face drained of color. You're lying. I want a DNA test right now. I won't let you scam me into raising someone else's child.
The pale golden sunlight of a New York autumn afternoon pierced through the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, bathing the vast office in a muted glow. From this height, the Statue of Liberty outside looked no bigger than a souvenir figurine. Richard Sterling stood by the window, slowly swirling a glass of 25-year-old Macallan. The amber liquid shimmered, releasing the scent of oak, age, and power. Today, he turned 45. But more importantly, today was the day he became king. 2 more hours, Richard. Arthur's gravelly voice came from the long walnut conference table. The Sterling family's private attorney adjusted his glasses, scrolling through a Swiss Trust Bank interface on his iPad Pro. The Sterling Trust Board has approved the transfer, Arthur said evenly, though tension crept through his tone. At exactly 5 p.m., assuming no emergency court injunction is filed, $500 million will be wired directly into your personal account. The inheritance tax has been fully optimized through Delaware shell entities. Richard smirked and took a sip of his whiskey. He turned, walking across the thick Persian carpet toward Arthur. You worry too much, Richard said casually. What was my grandfather's condition again? No outstanding legal disputes. I'm cleaner than a blank sheet of paper. In the corner of the room, Chloe, his stunning fiancée in a tight Chanel dress, held her phone high, smiling brightly at the screen. Hi, guys! Welcome back to Chloe's channel. Can you believe this view from my future husband's office? She chirped. Tonight, we're making a big announcement at his birthday party in the Hamptons. Smash that heart. Richard glanced at her, shaking his head with amused pride. He liked the way she showed him off. It proved he owned what other men only dreamed of. Arthur lowered his voice and glanced toward Chloe to make sure she couldn't hear. And, Elena, you're absolutely sure? The name froze Richard's smile for half a second, then he burst out laughing. Elena? He scoffed. She's rotting somewhere in Paris or Rome. 5 years ago, I filed a default divorce judgment. The court ruled in my favor because she disappeared. The case was sealed. The appeal window closed years ago. She's history, Arthur. Cheap history. Richard slammed his glass onto the table, his eyes blazing with ambition. I played the obedient saint for 5 years just waiting for today. $500 million. I'll kick those fossilized shareholders to the curb and rebuild this empire my way. No one can stop me. No one. Suddenly, the desk phone rang. His private secretary's voice came over the intercom. Mr. Sterling? Security reports visitors requesting access. They claim they have an appointment. I have no appointments after 3, Richard snapped. Send them away. Sir, they're accompanied by the New York City Sheriff's Office. The room fell silent. Chloe's cheerful live-stream chatter suddenly felt grotesquely out of place. John jumped to his feet, his face draining of color. Richard gripped the armrest of his chair. A cold sensation crept up his spine, cutting through the expensive whiskey's warmth. Let them in, Richard growled, eyes locked on the private elevator doors. The stainless steel doors slid open with a soft ding, gentle yet piercing. The elevator doors opened fully. The air in the room seemed to solidify. Stepping out were not familiar corporate security guards, but 2 tall officers wearing the polished badges of the New York City Sheriff's Office. They moved aside, allowing 2 figures to enter. One was a silver-haired, middle-aged man carrying a crocodile leather briefcase. Simon Vance, a constitutional law shark Richard had heard of but could never afford. The other was Elena. Richard froze. In his memory, Elena had been frail, insecure, hiding behind loose clothing. but the woman standing before him radiated cold authority. She wore a bespoke ivory Dior suit. Tom Ford's sunglasses concealed her eyes, her presence sharp as a surgeon's blade. "Happy birthday, Richard," Elena said calmly, removing her sunglasses. She didn't spare Chloe a glance. Instead, she walked straight to the conference table, stopping beside her ex-husband's unfinished drink. "What the hell are you doing here?" Richard roared, forcing composure as his voice cracked. "Security! Arthur, call the police! This is illegal trespassing!" One sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "Mr. Sterling, we are executing official court duties. Please maintain distance." Simon Vance slammed a thick stack of documents onto the glass table. The dull thud echoed like a judge's gavel. "We're not here for a party, Mr. Sterling," Vance said coolly. "You are hereby served." Arthur lunged forward, grabbing the papers. After scanning the first page, his face went deathly pale. "What is this?" Richard snapped, snatching the document. Bold letters screamed at him. "Order of the New York State Supreme Court, stay of divorce judgment, case no 4059CV. 15 minutes ago," Elena said evenly, "Judge Parker signed an emergency stay. Your default divorce judgment from 5 years ago has been suspended due to evidence of serious judicial fraud. Legally speaking, at this very moment, you and I are still married." "And that means," Vance added mercilessly, "we've notified the trust board. All marital assets, including the $500 million scheduled for release at 5 p.m., are now frozen under marital property law." Arthur's phone vibrated violently. He checked the screen, then looked up at Richard in despair. "The bank just confirmed your transaction code was rejected. The account is locked." Richard staggered backward, colliding with the table. He glanced at his watch. 3:35 p.m. The nightmare had only begun. Richard laughed, a hollow, arrogant sound. He tossed the court order onto the floor and stepped closer to Elena, using his height to intimidate her. "Fraud?" he sneered. "What the hell are you talking about? You think you can scare me with a piece of paper? The divorce petition has your signature. I had a notarized witness. You're desperate, Elena." He turned to Arthur and shouted, "Sue her! Slander! Extortion! Now!" Elena didn't argue. She calmly removed a gold-plated USB drive from her purse and plugged it into the smart conference table. "I don't need to argue, Richard," she said coldly. "Let the past speak for itself." The massive 100-inch LED screen flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white footage. A timestamp appeared in the corner. October 14th, 2020, 10:15 a.m. The room fell silent. Richard recognized it instantly, a dingy notary office in Queens. On screen, a younger Richard shoved a thick envelope across the desk toward a balding man with glasses. $50,000 cash, untraceable, Richard's recorded voice said clearly. "All you need to do is stamp that Elena Sterling signed here. She'll never know." The notary hesitated, then stamped the divorce papers. Elena was nowhere present. The screen went black. Richard stood frozen, blood draining from his face as if the floor had vanished beneath him. Elena folded her arms. "The notary's name is Henry," she said icily. "After taking your money, he fled to Mexico. You thought he disappeared forever. No, I spent 5 years hiring private investigators across North America. Last week, we found him hiding in Tijuana. He agreed to testify in exchange for immunity." Van stepped forward, voice razor sharp. "Forgery, bribery of a public official, fraud upon the court. Richard, this is no longer a civil dispute. These are criminal charges. You have no leverage left." Arthur let his arms fall helplessly. As a seasoned attorney, he knew the game had ended the moment that video played. A forged signature meant one thing: the divorce never existed. Richard stared at the dark screen. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by raw terror, as he realized the trap had been closing for 5 years, perfectly, silently, and it had just snapped shut. The air in the room had turned heavy, thick as lead. Richard leaned against the edge of the table, sweat forming along his hairline. But Elena was far from finished. Her gaze slowly drifted away from Richard and settled on the far corner of the room, where Chloe stood frozen, hands trembling as she hurriedly shut off her live stream. Attorney Vance understood his client immediately. He flipped to the next page of the file, his voice calm and mechanical, like a calculator reading out a verdict. Because the marriage between my client and Mr. Sterling was never legally terminated, he said, under New York state law, all assets acquired or purchased during the past 5 years are classified as marital property. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Chloe. This includes luxury expenditures made for third parties, specifically a $4 million penthouse in Tribeca, a Porsche 911 Turbo S, and, he paused, eyes settling on Chloe's left hand, the 10-carat fancy yellow diamond ring you're wearing. Chloe gasped, instinctively covering the oversized diamond with her right hand as she backed toward the door. "No, Richard gave it to me," she cried, panic breaking her voice. "It's an engagement ring. It's my personal property." Only then did Elena step forward. The sharp clicks of her heels echoed across the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of Chloe, arms crossed, tilting her head, pity and contempt mixed in her expression. "Engaged?" Elena scoffed. "My dear, how exactly do you get engaged to a man who already has a lawful wife?" Her voice dropped, cold and precise. "Because legally speaking, that ring was purchased with marital funds. In other words, you're wearing my money." Chloe's face flushed red, then drained white. She turned desperately toward Richard. "Richard, say something. You promised me." But Richard didn't even look at her. His mind was locked on the fate of his $500 million. His silence hit Chloe like a slap. Vance delivered the final blow, his tone icy. "Miss Evans, if you leave this room wearing that ring, we will immediately notify the authorities and have you detained for unlawful possession of disputed assets. You could be taken into custody on the spot. Trust me, Rikers Island is not kind to skin like yours." Chloe broke down, tears spilling freely. With shaking hands, she pulled the ring off her finger, the same ring she had proudly shown the world just minutes earlier, and slammed it onto the glass table with a sharp clack. She turned away, humiliated. Elena picked up the ring, examined it under the ceiling lights, then dropped it straight into Richard's unfinished glass of whiskey. The wall clock crept to 3:50 p.m. Each ticking second sounded like a nail being driven into Richard's coffin. Time was no longer on his side. If word of the asset freeze leaked beyond this office, the board of directors would tear him apart long before he ever touched the money. "Everyone out, now," Richard roared, pointing at the door. "Arthur, take the sheriffs and Mr. Vance to the lounge. Coffee. I need to speak privately with my wife." Arthur understood immediately. He ushered everyone out, including a sobbing Chloe, devastated over the lost ring. The heavy wooden doors shut. The vast office was suddenly empty, except for the two of them. Without an audience, Richard dropped his aggressive facade. He lunged for the bar, skipped the glass, and drank straight from the bottle, trying to steady his racing heart. He turned back to Elena, eyes wild, like a cornered animal still trying to bare its teeth. "All right, Elena," he exhaled. "You win this round. Clever move. He leaned against his desk. Let's skip the legal theater. We both know why you're here. How much do you want? 10 million? I'll wire it the moment the trust releases funds. Tax-free. Clean money. Elena didn't respond. She slowly walked around the room, studying the expensive artwork Richard used to decorate his wealth. Growing impatient, Richard pressed on. 20 million? Don't get greedy. That's enough to buy an island in Greece. Elena stopped in front of an abstract painting and shook her head slightly. You still believe everything has a price, Richard? Cold sweat soaked through his shirt. 4 p.m. 1 hour left. Grinding his teeth, Richard threw out the number he believed no one could refuse. $50 million, 10% of the estate. Sign the withdrawal now and it's yours. Final offer. Elena turned to face him. The last trace of a smile vanished, replaced by an icy stare. I don't need your money, she said flatly. My family in Europe owns banks you're not even qualified to open an account with. She stepped closer, her voice dropping, razor sharp. What I want is my dignity. 5 years ago, you painted me as a runaway lunatic to steal what was rightfully mine. Today, I don't want cash. I want you in court, publicly admitting you're a fraud, a forger. I want you to bow your head. Richard went numb. A public admission of fraud would violate the moral clause of the trust. It would cost him everything. You want to destroy me, he whispered, finally realizing she hadn't come to negotiate. She had come to execute. The desperation in Richard's eyes suddenly vanished, replaced by a cruel smirk. He understood now. Money wouldn't silence a woman who didn't need it. So he aimed at the only thing she still protected, her image. Richard walked slowly to the concealed wall safe behind an oil painting. He spun the dial. The steel door opened. He didn't take cash. Instead, he pulled out an old, dusty brown envelope, sealed tight. You want to talk about truth, Elena, he said calmly. Fine, let's talk about truth. He tossed the envelope onto the table, sliding it toward her. You remember the sanctuary in Malibu, don't you? That luxury rehab center in 2018. He smiled thinly. Your medical records are still in my possession. Severe depression, alcohol abuse, and, oh yes, self-harm tendencies. He leaned forward. These are protected under HIPAA unless they accidentally leak to TMZ or the New York Post. What do you think happens then? Elena glanced at the envelope, her brow tightening slightly. It was the darkest chapter of her life, after her miscarriage, which Richard never cared about. Seeing her reaction, Richard pressed harder. In America, the court of public opinion is more brutal than any courtroom. I'll hire the best spin doctors money can buy. They'll paint you as a mentally unstable ex-wife returning after 5 years to extort her successful former husband out of jealousy. He hissed inches from her face. Who do you think they'll believe? A billionaire CEO or a former psychiatric patient? He stepped back, folding his arms smugly. So choose, take the 50 million and disappear, or tomorrow's headlines will show you drugged and broken in rehab. Richard believed scandals terrified elite women. He believed he had found her weakness. He was wrong. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even bother opening the envelope. Instead, she nudged it aside with one finger, as if brushing away trash. You're naive, Richard, she said quietly. Did you really think I'd walk into the lion's den unarmed? You play media games. I play by federal law. She reached into her leather briefcase and removed another file, this one dark blue, stamped with the powerful eagle seal of the United States government. Do you know how Al Capone died? She asked softly. Not for murder, not for smuggling. He rotted in prison because he angered the IRS. Thud, the file landed in front of Richard. Inside were copies of his Form 1040 tax returns from the past 5 years, numbers circled and marked in red. "Look at your filing status," Elena said, pointing. "For 5 consecutive years, you declared yourself single to gain tax benefits and conceal illicit investments." Her eyes locked onto his. "But remember, 15 minutes ago, the court ruled your divorce fraudulent, which means for 5 years you were legally married." Her voice sharpened. "Declaring single under oath constitutes perjury and federal tax fraud." Richard staggered backward into a chair, his face drained of color. He knew the truth of America. You might escape murder with a good lawyer. No one escapes the IRS. "Each false return carries 3 to 5 years in federal prison," Elena finished coldly. "You filed 5. That's 15 to 20 years. No parole, no probation." Richard tried to speak, but his throat locked. Elena glanced at her watch. "Either you comply right now," she said, "or I hand this file to the IRS agents waiting downstairs." She leaned in for the final sentence. "Tonight, instead of blowing out candles in the Hamptons, you'll be counting days in a federal cell while every dollar you own is seized." The conference room doors burst open with a loud slam. Chloe rushed in, no trace left of the elegant, delicate woman she once pretended to be. Her carefully applied makeup was now twisted by panic. She had been pressing her ear against the solid oak door and had heard every lethal key word echoing from inside. Prison, IRS, asset seizure. Richard spun around, a faint flicker of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. He was drowning in a legal ocean, and he needed a lifeline, comfort, loyalty, or, at the very least, an ally. "Chloe, sweetheart, let me explain. This is just a negotiation tactic. Explain what?" Chloe shrieked, cutting him off. "That you're about to rot in prison for 20 years and end up broke?" She backed away behind the sofa, staring at Richard as if he were carrying a contagious disease. "You said you were the king of New York. So what now? A tax criminal about to lose everything?" Without hesitation, Chloe pulled out the latest iPhone and started dialing frantically. She turned on speaker mode. The ringing echoed through the dead silence of the room. "Hello, Mark? It's me. Listen carefully," Chloe shouted into the phone, ignoring everyone present. "Freeze all joint accounts immediately. Pull every dollar from the emergency fund and move it into the Cayman Shadow account, now. Separate my assets from his file. He's about to go bankrupt." Richard stood frozen. The betrayal cut deeper and more humiliating than any blow Elena had delivered. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing?" he whispered. "You said we were soulmates. You said you didn't care about money." Chloe ended the call and looked at him with the raw contempt of a ruthless opportunist. "Wake up, old man. I love the high life. I love Milan, private jets, unlimited black cards. I didn't sign up to marry a prison inmate." She pointed her manicured finger straight at his face, her voice dripping with venom. "Without that $500 million, you're just a failed old man with a beer belly and a mountain of legal problems. You think I tolerated your mood swings for love? Don't make me laugh." At the head of the conference table, Elena calmly sat in Richard's executive leather chair, her tilted head slightly, a half smile of pure mockery forming on her lips. "Well," Elena said lightly, her voice soft as a breeze, yet slicing straight through Richard's pride. "Looks like your market value just crashed, Richard. Even rats don't abandon a sinking ship this fast." Richard looked at the fiancée, who was now calling her lawyers to tear apart what remained of him, then at the powerful ex-wife holding his fate in her hands. In a room reeking of money, he realized he was completely alone. The minute hand on Richard's Patek Philippe advanced with cruel precision. 4:45 p.m. Only 15 minutes remained before the federal banking system cut off for the day. Arthur, drenched in sweat, had just ended a call from Zurich. He turned to Richard, his voice shaking with panic. "Richard, listen to me. The trust bank just issued a red alert. They've seen the court order on the federal system. If, by exactly 5 p.m., there is no signed waiver of claim from Elena, the transaction will be canceled. The funds will be frozen for at least 2 years pending investigation." 2 years, Richard stammered, his face turning pale. "No, that's impossible. Tomorrow is the deadline for the margin calls. If the money doesn't hit my account tonight, the banks will seize this tower on Monday morning. I'll lose everything. I'll be bankrupt." The financial pressure crushed Richard like a 1,000-ton boulder. Without cash flow, his real estate empire was nothing more than a sandcastle. He looked around the room. Chloe had stormed into the hallway, screaming at her lawyers. Arthur stood helpless. Richard turned back to Elena. She was still sitting there, calmly sipping her tea as if $500 million weren't about to evaporate. Her composure drove him insane, but terrified him even more. He realized that life and death now rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had once discarded. The arrogant ego of a CEO collapsed. Survival instinct took over. Richard rushed to Elena, slammed both hands on the table, lowering his head to her eye level. All right, Elena, you win," he shouted, his voice breaking, nearly begging. "I'm sorry. I admit it. I'm a bastard. I was wrong. Please, don't let me lose everything." "I'll do anything you want," he panted, eyes bloodshot. "What do you want? Shares? Cash? Or do you want me to kneel and apologize? Say it. Just sign that damn paper so the bank releases the money. I'm begging you." The silence was chilling. Elena set her teacup down. The porcelain clinked sharply against the glass table. She looked at Richard, her eyes unmoved, and slowly delivered her final judgment. Elena did not answer immediately. She calmly opened her briefcase and took out a thin document, just a single A4 page. Not a thick asset settlement agreement, but a suspiciously concise addendum. "I will sign the asset freeze withdrawal right now," Elena said evenly, as if discussing the weather. "I will also agree to an immediate divorce, making you legally single before 5 p.m. You will have your $500 million. Richard's eyes lit up like a drowning man spotting a plank. "What's the condition? Say it." Elena slid the paper toward him. "You must sign this, an irrevocable transfer of beneficiary rights." Richard snatched the document and scanned the legal language. He frowned, then read aloud the bolded clause. "The undersigned, Richard Sterling, voluntarily transfers all control and beneficiary rights of the Sterling Trust to the next legal heir of the Sterling lineage." Richard jerked his head up, staring at Elena as if she were insane. He let out a distorted laugh under immense pressure. "Have you lost your mind, Elena? Or did you forget my family tree? My parents died in a plane crash 10 years ago. I'm an only child. I have no siblings. I have no children." He slammed his hand onto the paper. "The next legal heir of the Sterling lineage, that's me. Only if I die does the inheritance transfer. I'm standing right here. You're asking me to sign the money over to myself?" Arthur reached for the document. "Wait, Richard. The wording is ambiguous. Let me review the legal definition of legal heir under state inheritance." "There's no time, Arthur," Richard snapped, brushing him aside. He glanced at the clock. 5:55 p.m. 5 minutes left.
He believed Elena was playing a psychological game or demanding a meaningless symbolic victory. "Fine. If you want word games, I'll indulge you." Richard pulled out his gold-trimmed Montblanc pen. "I'll transfer it to the next heir. Since that person doesn't exist, the money stays mine." Typical woman, short-sighted. Without hesitation, Richard signed his flamboyant signature at the bottom of the page, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore, like nailing down his victory. "There, signed. Now it's your turn," he snapped, tossing the document and pen toward Elena. Elena caught the paper and carefully examined the signature. A cold, enigmatic smile crossed her lips. "Transaction completed, Richard." Elena held the document Richard had just signed, her eyes gliding over it one last time like a judge reviewing a death sentence. Without a word, she took out her own pen and swiftly signed the waiver of claim and the mutual divorce confirmation. "Arthur, scan everything and send it now," Elena ordered coldly, tossing the file toward the aging lawyer. Arthur fumbled, using a secure app on his iPad to scan the documents and hit send. A green upload circle spun on the screen. The entire room held its breath, eyes fixed on the large display connected to the banking system. 4:58 p.m., 4:59 p.m. Ding! The sound of a successful transaction chimed, sweet as heavenly music to Richard's ears. The screen flashed bright green. Funds released via wire transfer, $500,000. Richard collapsed into the leather chair, exhaling deeply, as if he had clawed his way back from death. The money was released. He was safe. He was king again. Fear vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by his familiar arrogance. Richard stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, smoothed his messy hair, and sneered at Elena. "You really are a foolish woman, Elena. You had the chance to destroy me, and instead you chose a ridiculous word game." He lifted his glass and pointed at the inheritance transfer document. "The next heir. What do you think that piece of paper is worth when I'm alive and childless? Nothing changed. The money is still mine, and you empty-handed. A cheap symbolic victory, huh?" He waved dismissively. "Now get out of my office. Take that gold-digging bitch Chloe and your lawyers with you. I'm celebrating. Don't ever let me see your face again." Arthur wiped sweat from his forehead, relieved, gathering his papers. Richard believed it was over. He thought he had won because of his ex-wife's stupidity. But Elena didn't move. She remained seated, legs crossed elegantly, her smile turning darker, more terrifying. "Wait, Richard," Elena said softly, her voice echoing through the room. "Who told you you don't have a child?" She turned to Attorney Vance and nodded. "Open the door." Attorney Vance opened the massive oak doors. From the hallway, a middle-aged nanny in uniform entered, holding the hand of a little boy about 4 years old. The boy had neatly combed blonde hair, wore a Ralph Lauren children's suit, and stared wide-eyed at the tense room full of adults. Richard froze. The crystal glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The sound ripped through the silence. He stared at the child, then at Elena. His breathing turned ragged. "Let me introduce Leo Sterling," Elena said, no longer cold, her voice filled with a mother's pride. "Our son. He was born exactly 7 months after I left you." "That's impossible." Richard staggered back, face drained of color. "You're lying. I want a DNA test right now. I won't let you scam me into raising someone else's child." Attorney Vance stepped forward, blocking him with the authority of the law. "It's too late for that, Mr. Sterling." He pointed to the document Richard had just signed.
You transferred beneficiary rights to the next legal heir. And let me remind you of a basic principle of New York family law: presumption of legitimacy. Vance explained calmly, each word like a nail in Richard's coffin. The court has just confirmed that you were never divorced. Leo was born during a lawful marriage. By law, the husband of the mother is automatically listed as the father on the birth certificate. No DNA test required. The law has already recognized you as the father. Arthur collapsed into a chair, clutching his head. My God, you killed yourself, Richard. You just transferred everything to the heir, and Leo is that heir. Elena walked to her son and rested a hand on his shoulder. The $500 million wire from Switzerland didn't go into your account, Richard. The banking system automatically routed it into the Leo Sterling Trust. And since Leo is a minor, full control of that trust belongs to the sole legal guardian. She smiled brilliantly. Me, his mother. You just signed your entire empire over to me and my son, while you get nothing. Richard crumpled to the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling. In one stroke of his own pen, he had lost his money, his power, and his future. Richard remained on his knees as Chloe's heels clicked toward him. No sweet words, no affection. She stopped in front of him, ripped off her diamond earring, and threw it at his chest. I just spoke to my lawyer. With your assets transferred and frozen, you're officially broke. Our prenup is void because you lied about your finances. She smirked, dialing her phone. I've called an Uber. Don't contact me again. I don't date losers who live off their ex-wife's allowance. The meeting room door slammed shut behind her. Only Elena, Leo, Eternal Vance, and Richard remained. Elena adjusted Leo's collar and looked down at Richard, not with triumph, but with pity. Don't worry, Richard, she said gently. As Leo's trustee, I'll allocate a modest monthly allowance for you, enough to rent a small apartment in Queens and ride the subway. After all, you are the father of billionaire Leo Sterling. She took Leo's hand and walked away. Arthur quietly packed his briefcase and followed. He knew the ship had sunk, and the new owner was 4 years old. As the elevator doors closed, separating Elena's glamorous future from Richard's ruin, Vance removed his glasses and asked softly, "A flawless move, Mrs. Sterling, but I'm curious, didn't Richard ever question Leo's appearance? The boy has dark brown eyes. The entire Sterling bloodline has blue." Elena looked down at Leo playing with her jacket button and smiled, a secret she had guarded for 5 years. Richard was too arrogant to notice details, Simon. He only saw what he wanted to see. She whispered the final truth. Leo isn't Richard's biological son, not a single drop of Sterling blood. He's an orphan I legally adopted in Florence. I adjusted the adoption date to match the pregnancy timeline. Vance froze. Then the inheritance? Exactly, Elena cut in, gazing at the New York skyline lighting up. The will only required a legally recognized child, and moments ago, Richard himself waived DNA rights and confirmed paternity for legal protection. He handed his empire to a complete stranger. He'll live the rest of his life believing his fortune stayed within his bloodline. That illusion is the most humane punishment I could give him. Back on the 50th floor, the Manhattan sunset burned crimson. Richard staggered to the floor-to-ceiling window. His phone buzzed with an automated message. Personal account balance, $0. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, staring at the ant-sized people below. He had once ruled this world. Now he was nothing.